1. I'll begin by saying that I, 24 and male, come from a very well-known West African country, and I come from one of 3 major ethnic groups in my country. My country has a lot of oil, and my father, 64, male, is an engineer and worked for a very big oil company before he retired a few years ago. He is the second of 3 children. Due to his job, salary and position within the company, he became the entire family's breadwinner. His elder brother had 7 children, and his wife and his younger brother had 2 children, with his late wife, and my father trained each and every one of them. He sent them all to school through their nursery to primary and secondary schools, and when they all graduated from high school, he gave each of them the option of either going to a higher institution or helping them start up a business of their own. Every Christmas, we'd travel to the village and he'd buy multiple 50-kilogram bags of rice, bags of beans, tons of groceries, specially dried fishes, and so much more, and he'd distribute this to the entire family, aunts, uncles, etc. He catered for his siblings, cousins, old friends in the village, as well as their respective families. So much, and it sometimes offended my mother, because while he took excellent care of us, and she was never against him helping his siblings out, she felt he was making them overly dependent on him. He opened a thriving business for his elder brother's wife and stocked up her business with all the necessary wares, and did the same for his younger brother, and yet whenever they had a problem, they'd choose to call him instead of solving even the most basic problems by themselves. This is all preamble to show you that he really cared for his family. There are a few cases of prime entitlement I'd like to point out. Case 1. This involves my father's elder brother's wife, Rita, and her eldest son, Chris. Rita is a woman in her 50s and Chris is in his mid-30s. When Chris was born, his mother despised him because, given our tradition and culture, she felt like his pregnancy forced her into a marriage she did not want, so she took out her frustration on him. When he was 11, my mother was a newlywed, and on one of her trips accompanying my dad to the village, she saw how Rita physically abused her own son, which is pretty common here under the guise of discipline. And out of fear for his safety, my parents asked his father to let them take Chris back to the city, so they could, in a sense, foster him as their own to remove him from that abusive environment. I was barely a year old at this point. Chris lived with us for roughly 18 years. He got a good education, and when it was time to go to the university, he had a lot of problems gaining admission. In my country, all the universities, both state and federal, are under an organization, and everyone takes an annual national exam based on your intended course of study, and those who do the best are admitted into their institution of choice. He'd taken his exam for about 6 years, and each time he'd fallen short and hadn't received an admission, so my dad gave him the option to continue trying or put it on hold and learn a good trade for about a year, and after that he'd open a business for him, and maybe he could try getting into the university later on if he still wanted. He chose the latter option, and he was sent off to another city to stay with a family friend who taught him all he needed to know about the given business for free, and after a year, he returned back home. My father gave him what is the equivalent to $12,000 to begin a business. Over here, $12,000 is a very big chunk of money, especially with the low cost of living here compared to our Western counterparts, and also especially how low our tax laws are. My dad offered him a check for that amount, and he refused it, saying how small the money was. My dad had already found a really good space for him to run his business, and had paid and rented it out for 2 years for him, as well as paying his water and electric bills. The $12,000 was an initial capital for him to stock up on his wares, without having to worry about rent or any critical expenses, for 2 years at least. All he had to do was simply make sales and bring in profits so that after 2 years, he'd afford to take on the expenses on his own, because he probably would have saved quite a bit of money in that time, and even if he did have difficulties, knowing my dad, he would have jumped in to help. However, Chris rejected the money, saying how small it was, and he was expecting at least $17,000. That although the space my dad had rented for him was in a prime location, that it was too small for him, and that he had found a much bigger space a few blocks away, and he expected my dad to pay for that as well. He said he had big ideas and didn't want my dad to repress his ideas. so he needed the appropriate support. My mother just about lost her head hearing this and chastised him about how ungrateful he was being. She asked him how many people were willing to do the things my dad had done for him. She asked him why he couldn't use this fund as an initial capital and begin his business and strive to make it successful so that he could afford to move into a bigger space after the 2 years lease was up. He got upset and called his mother, with whom relations had improved significantly over the years, and she tore my dad a new one. She screamed in her native language about how, after the stress he must have been under by not getting into the university, the least you can do is make sure this dream of his is nurtured fully. Why are you being an akanchi, which means stingy in my language, to have the money, so just do as he asks in the way that he asks? If you died today, would they bury you with your money? You're not setting a good example as his uncle to Fikawa, which basically means God forbid. My father did not respond and promptly ended the call. Later on, his dad, my father's brother, called him, and I don't know what was said, but after that he came and picked up the check, where he had previously dropped it, and muttered a half-assed thank you before leaving. My dad also received a call from his brother apologizing for his behavior. Fast forward 2 years, and this was now 2016. I was 18, 19, and my immediate younger sister, with 12, was now in secondary school, and my other siblings were also in primary school. So the financial burden on my dad was quite a lot during this time. So he called Chris and had a talk with him. This was sometime in October, and my dad said that since Chris's business was going well, that perhaps it was time for him to move out of our home, maybe by the new year, so that the financial constraints could be alleviated a bit. Now mind you, Chris had lived with us for 18 years since I was barely a year old, and now I was almost 19, so he was about 30 years old now. He never paid rent for 1 day or paid for utilities. My dad always did. He never bought his own food or groceries either. My dad did that too for almost 2 decades he lived with us. When my dad asked him to move out, he said nothing, and like before called his mother. I have no idea what was said, but she called my dad in a fury that evening, screaming her head off about how my dad has never really cared about her son's success, and brought up the $12,000 incident from a few years earlier. She said something along the lines of, "You want him to leave your house while your wife's sister is still living with you? This is how little you care about your brother and his family. My son doesn't need you or your charity. My God will help him to survive with or without you," and so on. The wife's sister she referred to was a young niece of my mom's, who had lost her parents to militant actions in one of our cities, and she was barely 15 at that time. After that call, he packed his things and was gone in a few weeks. This was 2016, and I haven't seen or heard from him since then. They view my dad as a bad person for not giving him the amount of money he wanted and for asking him, a 30-year-old man with a thriving business, to move out. This is nothing in the grand scheme of things. There are more cases of entitlement in my family. 2. Around 2013, I was working in a bowling and recreation center for the US military. This is about one of these so very many interactions I was unfortunate enough to have with entitled people. Some military spouses can be some of the most entitled people around, and this incident is one of them. The start of the interaction was normal enough. Assign them a bowling lane, give out their shoes, and direct them to where the lighter bowling balls were since the kids were young. It was early to midday on a weekday, so while the lunch crowd was bustling, the bowling lanes weren't. They get through just a few frames before the kids start to get antsy, running around, climbing on the equipment, pretty much exhibiting how not to act in public. The bowling center side was fairly small, just a 10-lane house. It used to be a 14-lane house, but 4 lanes were removed and a game area put in, with a laser maze room, some arcade games, a pool table, and a tennis table. Wild kids are taking advantage of the emptiness and just running and screaming, trying to hide under tables, moving furniture around, running in and out of the laser maze room, on and off the pool table. All the while, EM is refusing to leave the bowling pit and screaming at the kids to return to her. My staff and I continuously keep taking turns telling the kids to stop running and screaming, stay out of the laser maze room, get off the pool tables, stop moving the furniture around, etc., etc., etc. EM never said anything to any of us during this time until one of the wild kids decides to check the pro shop door to see if it will open. Curses to my boss for leaving it unlocked, it opens. Wild Kid starts to throw around bottles containing chemicals used to plug and clean bowling balls, rolling bowling balls around in their rings, pushing on the pedal that turns on the bowling ball spinner, and trying to play with the drill machine. I run in there and escort the kid out, and this is when EM starts to lose her sanity. She screams, really screams, as if on the floor of a concert at us. Through these screams, she's asking me and another worker why we aren't helping to watch her kids and questioning why we're allowing her kids to run everywhere. Dad was silent the entire time. He had this look of, I'm so tired of this crap. I tell her that staff are not babysitters and she is responsible for the behavior of her kids. She keeps insisting that it is our job, with me repeating that her staff are not trained in youth care because, well, we're not the childcare facility. The screaming was so loud, my boss, whose office was on the other side of the building, heard it and walked over to see what was going on. We filled him in on what was going on, and he told us to just check back to what we were doing, and he would stay at the counter and watch them. They finally finished their game and came up to the counter to pay. Yam was still complaining, not about her kids, not about her kids' behavior, only about how we weren't helping to watch her kids. While she was walking out, she asked rhetorically why we don't have a play area for young kids like the fast food restaurants. This is a military-based bowling center, not Dave & Buster's. Of course, her last words, "I'm never coming back here," my boss said in a low whisper. "Please don't." Fast forward 3 years later, she came back. I didn't recognize her at first as she had gained some weight and grew out her hair. She was there with girlfriends. No wild kids or dad, but she was wearing a very small infant on her back in a carrier. When she spoke to tell my coworker her shoe size, I froze, my eyes went wide, and my brain-to-mouth filter failed as I said, "Oh God, I remember her." I may not have recognized her looks, but I knew that voice. She must have heard me because she shot me a death stare. I think I was too surprised to realize I said what I said out loud. I could not believe it. She was back. It had been 3 years, so I thought her husband probably got orders to another base, so they must have moved away. Nope. She was still around. I found out later that in those past 3 years she had taken on a couple of home-based businesses, MLMs, that military wives are notorious for doing, and obviously got pregnant and had a third kid. Since the wild kids weren't there and she was with other women, perhaps she'd be happy enough not to cause a scene. Unfortunately, she started to bowl, still wearing the baby on her back. The way this woman bowled, when she released the bowling ball, she would lean far forward at the same time her upper body was bowing down very deeply. This would cause the baby to slide upwards and forwards. I left it to my boss to have to tell her she could not continue bowling while wearing the baby. She wasn't happy since she hadn't brought a carrier or anything else to put the baby in. Luckily, her friends understood and were happy enough to just pass the baby around. Never saw her again, as later in 2016, I ended up moving away to another base. 3. So I work in a hotel kitchen. Had my fair share of run-ins with entitled people, but usually nothing exciting. Today's shift was a bit different, though. Probably don't need to mention abbreviations, should be all clear without explanation. So the story. As you can probably guess, pandemic means very little business, but we still get some families with their kids staying with us. And since we got quite a bit of spare time on our hands, I decided to get our show kitchen running, do prep work and various egg dishes for our guest breakfast there. It's great fun, especially for the children who might get bored sitting at the table with their parents sipping coffee for hours. So I just finished up an omelette and went to grab some eggs from the fridge. Coming back to a boy, maybe 7 or 8, in the show kitchen. It does happen. Kids are curious and there's no door or anything since it's meant to be openly visible to our guests. I approach him, ask what he might be doing. He said he's curious. So while I'm not technically allowed, I permit him to stay for a minute at a safe distance from any equipment and answer questions he had. He was rather respectful, and even when I turned down his question if he could see the whole kitchen in the back, he was quite polite and accepted that he can't. Now skip forward a few minutes and a lady who I assume is in her late 30s walks up. Thinking she wanted to order something, I of course enthusiastically greet her. But now I do wish I'd been hiding in the back like we usually do. Good morning, ma'am. What can I get you today?
My son wanted to see your kitchen. Why can't he?
I'm sorry, ma'am, but only hotel staff are allowed in the back.
But why? He just wants to have a look around.
Hygiene and safety regulations, ma'am. I'm sorry, but unless given permission from a higher-up, I cannot allow any of our guests into the kitchen.
Then go ask them.
I'm sorry, but they aren't available at the moment. If you'd like, I can inform them once they come back so you can talk it over. At this point, she just loudly huffed and walked away. So I thought it was over. Was I wrong? So about 20 or so minutes later, I was downstairs accepting a delivery and putting everything away. Coming back upstairs into the kitchen, and you can all guess who I found there. Em and her child walking around in the back of the house. Now at this point I was getting quite pissed off, but tried to stay polite since it is how we have to treat guests. Ma'am, the kitchen is off limits for our guests. I must ask you to please leave and return to the restaurant.
No, we haven't seen everything yet.
Mom, I thought we were allowed.
Yes, we are. We're paying for this stay, so we're of course allowed to see what the hotel has to offer.
Ma'am, once again, please return to the restaurant. I would like to avoid trouble.
Well, you're in trouble for denying us anyway. I will talk to your supervisor about that.
You could tell the kid was told by his mom that they're allowed. The confusion was written on his face, and in all honesty, I felt bad for him. If they had waited so I could get permission, I'd have happily shown him around, especially since this line of work is struggling to find any new employees. Having given up on a trouble-free solution, I call up the reception desk on our hotel internal staff phones and give them the details. To my surprise, they actually told me to show them around a bit, so I did, ignoring the mom and just showing the kid the kitchen. Not long after, a service colleague walks in, accompanied by police. Turns out they just wanted to keep them occupied until police arrived, and we could press charges for trespassing. As they were escorted out, the poor kid was visibly embarrassed, and just went straight to his dad, who told me that she claimed to have permission. Before they left, I made sure to grab a small bag of sweets for the kid. Told him and his dad that if he ever wants to take a proper look, they can get in contact with management, and we can get that sorted. 4. Never thought I'd ever meet a Karen in my country, but this happened some months ago. There's a basketball court in the neighborhood, and one of the few public ones in the city, and even though it's not that busy, as basketball is not that popular in my country, we have some regular players. Today we were 15, enough for 3 teams taking turns full court. Everyone had masks. This public park also had a playground with swings on the side of the court, with a small wall dividing the spaces, some green areas, etc. All in all, a relatively big park. While we were playing, a kid, about 5 or 6 years old, Kevin, starts riding a scooter in the middle of the court. We finally asked him to get out as it could be dangerous for him. His dad, Bob, was sitting on the side watching his kid interrupt the game, so we decided to talk to him. Hey, could you please get your kid out of the court? It can be dangerous for him. We may run him over.
This is a public court. He can ride what he wants.
Yeah, but it's a basketball court, and we're playing here. Can you take him to the playground over there?
Well, he wants to ride here.
Okay, but we won't take responsibility in case something happens. We continue playing, and the inevitable happens, and one of the players runs over the kid. He didn't see the kid as he was running, looking to the side, and the kid was small. See? This was bound to happen. Take your kid off the court. We don't want him to get hurt. Or us.
How dare you do this? This is a public place.
He then stands up and goes with his kid to the playground. We continued playing as if nothing had happened, but I saw him on the phone. No way he's calling the cops. But alas, a couple of minutes later, a patrol car arrives. The officer talks to Bob and gathers all of the players. Hey guys, this gentleman called us over saying that you kicked this kid out of the court and threatened them. What? That never happened. Awesome Grandpa intervenes. He's 62 years old and one of the regular players. He plays toe-to-toe with 20-year-olds. He's incredible.
Officer, I am by far the eldest here. Not only I have children, but grandchildren as well. I know what it is like to raise them and protect them. That guy is doing neither. We asked him to remove his kid from the court, as it would be dangerous for him and us. We'd understand if he was riding outside the court on the borders, but he was doing it in the middle of the court. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
We continued playing while the officer is talking to Bob. The kid, as entitled as he is, starts riding his scooter through the court again, so we yell, "Hey, officer!" and point at the kid. Bob shouts,
Kevin, get back here.
The officers left soon after without incident. We continued playing, as we thought the matter was resolved, but boy oh boy were we wrong. 30 minutes later, mighty Karen storms the court. She interrupts the game and yells from mid-court, "How much longer are you going to hold the court? I see you playing there every single day and you never let anyone else use it, and furthermore, you dare hit my kid!" Please note that our city has been under mandatory quarantine since June, but sports facilities have been closed since March. The quarantine was lifted 3 weeks before this all happened, mid-October, and of course everyone was eager to play again. One of the regulars, bit of a hothead, answers,
First of all, lady, put your mask on. Second, lower your tone. Even though this is a public place, it is a basketball court. You're endangering your son, and if he gets injured, it's not our fault.
You are the one who hit my child. How dare you? He's just a child trying to have fun.
Ma'am, you can go to the playground. It's right there.
And who are you to tell me what I can and can't do?
Well then, why don't you go fuck yourself?
She goes off.
How dare you tell me to go fuck myself? You don't have the right to say that. You're probably a fucking loser without kids that only knows how to play basketball and has no life.
Every one of the 15 players facepalms.
Lady, just go.
She goes to the playground and starts filming us. Probably to shun us on social media. Don't know the English word for this. In Spanish it's funar. Anyway, we play a little more and we leave. As I'm leaving, I say to her, as overly polite and courteous as I could, "Farewell, madam, please have a lovely evening." If I had a hat, I would have made a bow before her. She just gave me a death glare, but who cares? The nerve of some people. 5. This happened a few years ago, but still makes me ultra upset when I think about it. I also feel it's important to state that I was sexually abused as a kid and raped many times as a teen, and that my neighbor is full-on aware of it, and that I have a hard time standing up for myself and enforcing my boundaries. My neighbor and I used to volunteer together at a homeless youth drop center. I volunteered there first and made the awful mistake of inviting her. On a cold winter day in January, we had a new homeless kid come in for our drop-in services. He was 22, very tall and lean, wearing expensive-looking clothes and a ton of jewelry. He also had a MacBook. We've never had a kid come in with such nice things, so it was very unusual. He stated that he had somewhere to stay, but they'd only let him stay 3 days of the week, so the rest of the week he had to stay outside. My neighbor took a strong liking to him immediately, and told me that I should take him home with me. She said she'd do it, but she has all those girls to protect at home. She has 6 adopted daughters, all in their 20s. I'm also in my 20s and own my own home across the street from her with my husband and our 3 cats. My husband was deployed at the time, though. I told her that I wouldn't feel safe. She told me to lock myself in my bedroom. I'm supposed to give a man I don't know free rein of my house and rely on a flimsy bedroom door lock to keep me safe. That made me feel so worthless and bad about myself that her daughters are worth protecting, but I'm not. She kept trying to shame me into taking him home. Oh, what if he gets robbed? He has a lot of nice things. You have spare bedrooms in your house, why can't you give him one again? I told her I wouldn't feel safe. She just goes on and on about how it's cold, and I can just lock myself in my bedroom. She'd totally take him in, but she has her daughters to protect. Well, who's gonna protect me? So I told her I don't think my deployed husband would like it if I took him home. She tells me not to tell him. Oh, that'll be great if something does happen. Oh, hi, honey. I took in a homeless man and locked myself in our room to stay safe, and he totally robbed us. So that's why your PlayStation's missing. Or maybe I'd get raped again and get the pleasure of explaining to the police that I took a homeless man I just met to my home and got raped. Not good enough reason. Flimsy door lock is going to keep me safe, and I apparently owe him the benefit of the doubt instead of myself being able to be safe in my own home. So I tell her it's against the non-profit's rules to even let the homeless know where we live, let alone take them home with us. I'd get banned if I took him home. She told me not to tell him, and they wouldn't know. Who's gonna tell them, she says. When it was time to leave, she starts up again. How it's a shame I have spare rooms in my house and can't let him have one. As if I could just hand him one and it wouldn't be in my house. I again state that I wouldn't feel safe. He could rape, rob, or murder me or kill one of my pets. We just met him. Ain't no telling what he's capable of or might do. She badgered me the whole ride home too, just going on and on about how I should have blessed him with somewhere to stay. When we got home, she tells me it's not too late to go look for him. She knows where a lot of homeless like to sleep, and we could go back and search for him. I again tell her I wouldn't feel safe, my husband would be upset, and it's against the rules. She tells me, well, she just hoped nothing happens to him, especially since I could have given him my spare room. I walked away feeling so awful about myself. The whole thing made me feel worthless, especially since she knows my history, and would suggest such a thing in the first place. The fact alone that she stated she couldn't take him home because she has to protect her daughters, but I should take him in, that was so devastating to me, that I'm not as worthy of being protected, safe in my own home as her daughters are. I used to be shy and humble back then. Just thinking about it now makes me want to scream at her to fuck off. If me locking myself in my bedroom is good enough for me, then it should be good enough for her to take him home and have her daughters lock themselves in their fucking rooms. At least if something happens, they can scream for help. I'm home alone, and I doubt anyone would hear me. You want him out of the cold, then you take him home with you. Your daughter's safety shouldn't be any more important than mine. I've been needing to vent this off badly for such a long time. Thank you to anyone who listened to the whole thing. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to the Impractical Proudness of Parents. Hi Pop! Episode 79. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it around with all your friends and family and various pets and aunts and uncles, maybe your grandma, maybe that distant cousin named Fred that you haven't spoken to for a while. Random strangers you might encounter in your day-to-day life. You never know, they might enjoy some Hellfreezer. I have been noticing that people are sharing them more, and I very much appreciate it whenever I see those come across my feed. It's very helpful, because the YouTube algorithm likes it when people interact with the videos and share them about. Okay, let's see. As this is the start of the year, I'm going to do the business. You know the business I'm talking about. And that is plug my Patreon. Right, so if you look in the description of the video, and pretty much all videos, there's a little link to the Hellfreezer Patreon, where if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so. You're not required to do so. The videos remain as they are. It's essentially just to help me buy new equipment and things and such, and for any little emergencies that pop up. Never required, but always appreciated. And you can also find links to other wonderful things in there. If you'd like to get yourself some Hellfreezer merchandise, you'll find a link to the Hellfreezer Teespring store, where you'll find various mugs and hoodies. I think the hoodies are especially nice. I'm quite proud of the designs of those, and t-shirts and such. If there's something you would like that isn't in the store, do let me know, and I'll come up with a design and add it. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.